Hi there, good afternoon. I'd like to introduce you to our Cracking the Code MCAT Research Passage-based critical reasoning course, where I hope to walk you through a few simple steps to help you start to achieve your score on the MCAT. So, at first, I'm going to start by introducing you to myself. My name is Kamanthi Jacoby. I'm a second-year med school student, and I am an MCAT coach and tutor with over 300 hours of MCAT coaching experience. I've worked with over 70 MCAT students. I'm recognized as one of the top MCAT tutors in the Brooklyn, New York area on a top online tutoring website. And I've also worked at a top MCAT instruction company. So I bring a lot of experience, both my own experience taking the MCAT and tutoring students. And what I've realized, and the secret that I want to share with you today during this 45-minute course, is what the MCAT really is about, what skills they're really testing, and how you can start to implement this knowledge into your practice and hopefully reach your target score. So let's start off with the number one secret that you need to know in order to score as well as you can, which I'm assuming is to be in the top 1%. Right? So the number one secret that I like to share with students is that the MCAT is actually evaluating your critical reasoning and reading comprehension skills. This is very different from a lot of students who would think that the MCAT is approaching your ability to know all the MCAT related science content. The MCAT really wants to identify, can you apply your knowledge and can you critically reason through a situation, i.e. a passage, and answer some questions that are related to that passage. Reflecting on my own medical school experience, I oftentimes like to compare the MCAT very much so to the doctor-patient experience, where much like the MCAT, you're expected to engage with a novel situation, right? A passage, a new patient. You have to then go ahead and try to understand what's being presented to you, the information that the passage presents, or in the case of a medical visit, the information that a patient presents. The challenge, however, is that you have to organize that information, distill the most critical parts of that information, and then answer a few questions that require both your content knowledge, right? So on the MCAT, your chemistry, your biology, your biochemistry, your physics. In a real-world patient visit, your medical knowledge. You have to know your medical knowledge in order to apply a few questions about the patient. Similarly, on the MCAT, you obviously need to know your MCAT content to answer some of the questions. Now, the question is, how much content, how much critical reasoning? So according to the AAMC, 70% of questions require a minimal amount of content knowledge, right? So this is secret number 2 I want to share with you today. When you look at the different types of questions that the AMC provides, they break them down into 3 specific question types: explicit questions, implicit questions, and pseudo-discrete questions. On average, an MCAT passage is going to include about 6 questions. Of those 6, you can expect about 1 to 2 to be termed pseudo-discrete. And so what I mean by pseudo-discrete, these are questions that are standalone questions attached to a passage. They require minimal understanding of the passage and really simply rely on your studying of the content that you had to study for the MCAT. On the other hand, the other 70% of the questions are actually critical reasoning questions. There's 2 types: the explicit question and the implicit question. So the explicit question actually looks to see and identify your ability to read a passage and answer questions that are explicitly stated based on the passage. Oftentimes, the question stem might begin with a phrase such as, based on the passage, based on the figure, according to the experiment. They simply require your ability to read and comprehend the information presented to you in the passage and simply answer questions. The last type, which is the implicit question, is oftentimes the most challenging question. This is the question type that is looking to see, are you able to take a piece of information that is outside of the text, relate it to the text, and apply your understanding of the passage in order to answer the question. So with that, if we do a little bit of math, we quickly see that of this typical 6 questions you get per passage, about 2 to 4 of them on average are not really going to require an in-depth understanding of content. Rather, they're going to rely on your ability to read the passage, comprehend what's being presented, apply your background content knowledge, and hopefully work through a couple questions that require some level of critical thinking. So with that being said, now that I hope that I've given you a bit of a background and understanding of what the MCAT really is looking to test, right? How do students end up scoring in the top 1%, right? The students that are in the 1% know the secrets that I've told you. And remember, secret number 1, the MCAT is really a critical reasoning exam. Secret number 2, 70% of MCAT questions require a minimal amount of content knowledge. So with that, let's go ahead and break down the different MCAT passage formats in order to kind of give you a better picture of the different types of passages that you can be provided on the MCAT, and then how you should attack each different passage type. So the first passage type I want to present to you is the informational passage. This passage type is the most common passage in the Chem Phys section. This passage type, informational passage, as the title suggests, oftentimes is looking to provide a very straightforward presentation of scientific information or a description of a physical phenomenon. What they're really looking to do is to see, do you understand the scientific concept that's being presented in the experiment? And can you work your way through the passage by simply applying your knowledge of the physical and chemical properties that you should know already? So, for example, you might be presented with a physical phenomenon, and you're required to identify the scientific principles that are reflected in that physical phenomenon. For example, it might be a passage that's looking to see, can you identify the trends of electronegativity on the periodic table by providing you with a phenomenon that looks at different metals of different types and hopes to see, can you relate your knowledge of electronegativity to the phenomenon that's being presented? I personally think that the informational passage is one of the easiest passages to attack because a lot of the core information that you need in order to tackle the passage is presented right there on the passage. And what you really need to do, again, is focus on critically reasoning through a passage. The next type of passage is the experimental passage. This is the most common passage type in the biochemistry section. This passage type typically presents a main concept of interest, a hypothesis that is going to be investigating the experiment, a set of outcomes of interest, otherwise known as dependent variables, an independent variable that can affect the outcome or dependent variable, and a set of experimental methodology or lab techniques that will be used to determine what the effects of the outcome are based on the varying independent variables. Lastly, and least common of passage types is a persuasive reasoning passage type. In this passage type, a set of scientific phenomenon along with hypothesis that explains the phenomenon is provided in an experiment. Your question and the challenge that the MCAT is looking is to see if you can evaluate the hypothesis against any of the data that's presented, apply any relevant physical, physiological laws and principles that you know, and evaluate the level of persuasiveness or accuracy of the experiment and hypothesis presented to you. All right, so that I hope gave you a background on the different passage types that you're going to encounter on the MCAT. And again, to review, that's the informational passage type, the experimental research passage type, most common in the biochemistry and biology section, and the persuasive experiment type. The other thing that we talked about is the prevalence of critical reasoning on the MCAT. Recall, 70% of the questions that you'll see on the MCAT require minimal content knowledge and rather rely on your ability to critically reason and comprehend what you're reading. So with that being said, I'd like to teach you guys how to approach MCAT research-based passages using a simple model that I've used for many years to teach my students how to tackle the most difficult biochemistry, chemistry, and physics passages in order to score in the top 1% of the ChemPhys and Biochem section. So it's a very simple high-yield checklist approach that we use. And in order to understand how to use the checklist, I'd like to explain to you how we like to teach approaching any MCAT passage. I believe that most people who are going to score well on the MCAT come into every passage with a plan. If you have a plan, it's going to allow you to be more in control, manage your timing, and not get overwhelmed when you face difficult MCAT passages. My approach uses 7 very simple, tried and true approaches to reading any kind of experimental information. So let's just go ahead and jump in and break it down. So the first thing I want to mention is that this is a checklist. I like to emphasize that it's a checklist because it allows students to realize that you don't have to use it in a chronological order. You can pick any one of these 7 items, and as you read an MCAT science passage, you can quickly identify them and rapidly build your understanding of the passage. So let's walk through the 7 steps in order as I have them here, and then practice in the upcoming slides. So the first thing is the main topic. The main topic can be divided into 2 types of main topic. Sometimes main topics are simply a concept. So the main topic might simply be looking to explore glycolysis or the fluids or fluid dynamics, right? But more often and more challenging, main topics can be a set of processes or a set of steps that are presented in the background of the passage. And the rest of the experiment is going to explore some aspect of this process. And so identifying main topics, not simple as single word or single sentence concepts, but rather as this process, or even better, a set of steps, is a key way in order to simplify an MCAT passage. Once you've identified what the main topic is, you next want to identify what the objective of the passage of the experiment is. I like to put it simply, what part of the concept or what part of the process is most interesting to the experimenter who created this experiment. Why are they interested in that? What are they looking to analyze? Or maybe what are they looking to determine? These are some key phrases that I find very useful in helping me identify the objective of the passage. So again, let's start from the top. Anytime you face an MCAT science passage, you should first look to identify the main topic, which may be a concept or a process. You then want to dig in a little deeper and identify the objective of the passage. This might be what the passage is looking to analyze or looking to determine. By focusing in on the specific objective of the passage, you can then identify what outcome of interest is particularly focused on in the passage. Oftentimes, the outcome of interest is described as the dependent variable. And recall, the dependent variable can be graphically identified on any figure by looking at the y-axis. Fourth, I always like to look at the lab techniques used to measure the outcome of interest. As you learn more MCAT science, you'll start to identify as you do more practice passages that certain lab techniques are commonly used over and over again. For example, the SDS page. SDS page is a lab technique that's used to segregate proteins and protein fragments based on their size and charge. By identifying the different lab techniques and familiarizing yourself with these concepts, you can quickly be able to determine what the outcome of interest might be if you already understand how it's being measured. Next, I like to identify the independent variables. Specifically, I simply look to make a list of them. Oftentimes, one of the most confusing aspects of MCAT passage breakdowns is understanding what the independent factors that are being considered in an experiment are. Why, you ask? Well, there are oftentimes many different types of independent variables. whereas there can only be one dependent variable, which creates an opportunity for you to be confused. And so I like to simply say, first, make a list of all the independent variables that you see. Once you've identified the main topic, figured out the objective of the passage, identified the outcome of interest and how they're looking to measure it, made a list of your independent variables, I oftentimes like to make a prediction of the effect that I would expect to see from the independent variable on the outcome. Oftentimes, this requires you relying on your background knowledge if you've identified correctly what the main topic and objective are and can relate that to your existing content knowledge. Once you've gone through these set of steps, the rest is very easy. All you have to do is confirm your prediction by simply looking at any experimental data that's provided, whether it's a graph or a chart. So I'd like to quickly summarize the 7-step approach to any MCAT passage before we actually try and do it on an actual AAMC practice passage. So from the top, you always want to identify the main topic, which oftentimes could be a process, which includes multiple steps. Once you've identified the main topic, you always want to look for the actual objective of the experiment. What are they really looking to analyze or to determine or to measure? You then want to go ahead and find the outcome of interest for the dependent variable. You can quickly find this on the y-axis if a graph is provided. Next, it's often valuable to look at the techniques that are used to measure the outcome of interest. Once you've done this, you can make a list of your independent variables. These can oftentimes be found on the x-axis or in the legend of any graph that you're providing. Lastly, you want to predict and confirm the relationship between the independent variables and the outcome by looking at any graphical or experimental data that's provided. Now that we've covered our high-yield checklist to approach MCAT science passages, why don't we go ahead and give it a shot? So I recommend pausing the video here, looking over the MCAT passage provided below. I encourage you to click back and forth between the previous slide, which provided the 7 steps, read the passage, and make your own outline. And in the following minutes, I'm going to provide my own breakdown of the passage in order to highlight the 7 steps that can make any MCAT passage easy as pie. So with that being said, take a few minutes and we'll see each other on the other side. All right, great. So we've provided in your documentation is a outline of the passage, but I want to go through the passage with you and outline different aspects of it. So why don't we start by identifying the main topic? So let's start by reading. So the human intestinal tract is inhabited by a diverse assortment of microorganisms known as gut microbiota. These microbiota populations are increasingly implicated in the regulation of host metabolism and the development of obesity and diabetes. The catabolism of dietary fibers by gut microbiota results in the production of short-chain fatty acids, such as butyrate and acetate, which are an important energy source for the host. Short-chain fatty acids also act as signaling molecules with the ability to bind and activate G-coupled protein receptors. GPCRs, G-coupled GPCR43 to be specific, is expressed in white adipose tissue, WAT, and is not expressed in muscle or liver. Researchers generated GCPR43 deficient mice to analyze the contribution of GCPR43 to energy regulation. Wild type and GCPR43 mice were fed a standard diet or high-fat diet, and their body weights in grams, G, was measured weekly for 16 weeks. All right, so now that we've just kind of gone over the passage, let's talk about how to outline it. So I personally like to look at the first two paragraphs of any MCAT passage together because those oftentimes tell me where I can identify my main topic. So let's look at the first paragraph. So as you can tell from my highlights, I don't over highlight. I try to highlight the parts of the passage that are going to be the most important in helping me understand what the main topic or the objective of the passage is. So in the first paragraph, it appears that they're looking to talk about gut microbiota, which are located inside the human intestinal tract, and they've been implicated in some way in the regulation of host metabolism. At this point, the passage hasn't quite provided us enough information to determine how they're implicated, but as we read along, we recognize that these microbiota that are in the gut catabolize dietary fiber, which results in the production of short-chain fatty acids. So we now start to understand the process a little bit. So first, we have gut microbiota, which first we have gut microbiota, which are then implicated in catabolizing